History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. We are continuing with Lusitania month by looking into the details of why the inquiry isn't what people may think. Now, I would like to thank my friend Berrie from Berrie True Crime for narrating this video, and this is her first video she's done in a very long time, as she has been on my channel before. Berrie, thank you so much for coming on. It has been an absolute pleasure to invite you to narrate another video, and until then I'll leave you in the capable hands of Berrie as we talk about the Lusitania inquiry.
Why was the Lusitania inquiry a false sham? On Tuesday the 15th of June 1915, an investigation into the sinking of the Lusitania began inside Central Hall in Westminster, London. During the inquiry, testimonies from survivors, including Captain William Turner, were heard, while Lord Mersey, the man who also led the Titanic inquiry, and a panel would attempt to fit the missing pieces of this complicated puzzle. Within 5 days, the panel had concluded with a final report that was read out in the Houses of Parliament, detailing the events and movements including the voyage, navigation, and the torpedoing of the Lusitania. But despite the evidence that Lord Mersey published in his findings, historians have questioned the accuracy of the findings of the report. But why? Was the inquiry a cover-up from the British Admiralty? Or the German and Navy spies knew too much information that made the vessel a practical target? In this video, we will go in depth and answer questions that might explain the truth of the inquiry. Although we aren't going into much detail, the two key resources we are focusing on are the accusations of the Lusitania's captain, William Thomas Turner, and what the British Admiralty knew before the sinking. On the first day of the inquiry, Turner was questioned by Lord Mersey about his navigation and actions while in command of the vessel. From his out-of-character attitude to the fault for torpedoing the Lusitania, Turner was usually a respectable and sensible captain. His behavioural mannerisms and orders have been debated, but he was likely under stress, especially since the Admiralty had to pile up documents and instructions for the Cunard Line to pass them on to him before the Lusitania would leave Britain. When the war broke out in 1914, it is known that the British Admiralty had a chart called Trade Routes during war. The chart would have marked on a course that the vessel was to sail on. This is required by law, as all vessels, whether in military, hospital or passenger service, masters needed copies of notices before sailing. When on voyage, vessels must scatter widely on both sides of the track and should avoid all other vessels directly if they or their smoke are sighted. Points where trade conversions should, when possible, be passed through at night. Territorial waters should be used when possible. Remember that the enemy will never operate in sight of land if he can avoid it. Every effort is made to avoid capture and to cause the enemy to burn coal. Avoid excessive smoke. Colours are no indication of nationality until a vessel opens fire. All lights, except navigation lights, must be hidden, and navigation lights should not exceed the brilliancy laid down in rules for the prevention of collisions at sea. The second masthead light is unnecessary. Vessels quitting port in dangerous vicinity should endeavour to sail soon after dark, make a good offing by dawn, keeping off usual routes, and dim brilliancy of lights. Similarly, landfall should be made at dawn. Before the Lusitania sank, Turner said that he received copies of 3 Admiralty notices from the Cunard Line before the ship sailed out of Liverpool in late April 1915. However, Turner was also given a copy of a telegram, dated the 13th of January, from the Admiralty to Sir Norman Hill, chairman of the Cunard Line. The message, entitled Confidential, read: British shipping should be advised to keep a sharp lookout for submarines and display in sign of a neutral country or show no colours while anywhere in the vicinity of the British Islands. British ensign must, however, be displayed when British or Allied men of war should be met. House flags should not be flown. When the Lusitania made her way to New York, she didn't fly a house flag, and for the vessel's safety, she was painted in a grey colour scheme to disguise her identity, especially in stormy weather in the North Atlantic. Her funnels were even painted black. However, the Lusitania's golden letters were visible. Spotting them was how the crew of the U-20 submarine recognised the vessel before torpedoing the vessel. Also, Turner mentioned in the inquiry that on the morning of the 7th of May, the vessel was travelling from around 25 to 26 miles off Browhead to 9 to 10 miles from the old head of Kinsale. However, the ship was caught in dense fog on the head of the old Kinsale lighthouse. Turner lost his bearings, but he didn't command the Lusitania to take a shortcut like people believe he did. By the time the crew spotted the old head of Kinsale lighthouse, the fog had lifted, but when he lost his bearings whilst in the fog, Captain William Turner wanted a 4-point fixture on the lighthouse. He made the decision to change his course to South 87 East. He wanted to catch the tide going into the Mersey, as they didn't want to wait around for the tide. Around the same time, the Lusitania received a message from the Admiralty. Submarine active in southern part of Irish Channel, last heard of 20 miles south of Connibeg, light vessel. But the Lusitania never replied. The reason why was that under Admiralty's instruction, the vessel had to keep radio silence within 100 miles of land. The Lusitania was 13 to 15 miles from land at the time of the torpedoing. Other sets of Admiralty instructions include keeping lifeboats ready for lowering in the war zone and posting extra lookouts. These all never happened. Instead, Turner was accused of a lack of lifeboat drills, lack of training for the crew, and failure to avoid headlands and to steer a mid-channel course, which violated the directives. Therefore, with these crimes, Turner was faced to be found guilty of negligence. Turner was recalled on the last day of the inquiry, where he was asked questions if he had any Canadian troops on board the Lusitania and more information about the cargo she was carrying. For the rest of his life, Turner maintained that he had been following Admiralty instructions to the best of his abilities. With Turner being the scapegoat for the disaster, what was going on behind the scenes? Did the British Admiralty know the real truth? It is likely possible, as there is strong evidence to support this. To open up this second case, we need to look at the actions of both the German Navy and British Admiralty. At the beginning of the First World War, Germany pursued a highly effective U-boat campaign against merchant shipping. This campaign was aimed to create a war zone around Britain and to destroy any supplies British merchant ships have in the hope to invade the country. The Germans almost succeeded, but the British Admiralty had a trick up their sleeve. On the 4th February 1915, Germany declared a war zone around Britain, and this meant that if a U-boat was sailing in British waters, they could sink merchant ships without warning. Although the Germans would sink merchant and civilian ships, the German Navy insisted the Lusitania was being used as a weapon ship to break the blockage Berlin had been trying to impose around Britain. So they began using codebooks for the Navy so they could send telegrams if there is a need to sink vessels posing a threat to their country. In response, the British Secret Intelligence Service was given 3 of the German naval codebooks. There's no information as to how they got them, but once in possession, people were trained to decode the coded messages the Germans would send through wireless and telegraph traffic. British intelligence was listening in and following the movements of the submarine U-20, including the first day of its full voyage to its destination to a patrol zone off Liverpool. But while they were tracking the submarine's movements, they weren't reported to anyone except Churchill, the First Sea Lord Jackie Fisher, and Rear Admiral Henry Oliver. On the other side, the Lusitania's telegraphist or Turner never sent messages back to the Admiralty or other ships because they had to keep radio silence under Admiralty's instruction. Though there was some communication, these telegrams have never been released to the public. While German U-boats were sailing around Britain, the British Admiralty began to set up the super-secret spy entity named Room 40. The The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, suspected of knowing more about the circumstances of the sinking, partially because he wanted a situation to happen so the United States of America could have an excuse to join the war effort against Germany. In a confidential letter, Churchill said that it was a good idea to attract neutral shipping to the British Isles. For our part, we want the traffic. The more, the better, and if some of it gets into trouble, better still. Since the United States was Britain's ally in the war effort, the United States didn't join the war until 1917, but Churchill wanted the United States, so Britain can win the war against Germany and destroy the U-boat campaign. The trouble with the Lusitania running into U-boats began in 1914, when the vessel was being chased by 2 German cruisers from New York City to Liverpool. When she was chased, the crew and the captain at the time, Daniel Dow, were ordered to return to either Portland or Boston for their safety. Luckily, the ship managed to escape. A year later, Dow had a nervous breakdown when he heard the Admiralty's decision for British merchant ships to fly neutral flags and make attempts to sink U-boats around the British Isles. When Dow stepped back from sailing the ship, Turner was reappointed as captain of the Lusitania. Before the Lusitania left New York City in the spring of 1915, the Germans were continuing to keep an eye on any information involving British merchant and civilian ships, including the Lusitania. Somehow, they must have known that the Lusitania had a secret compartment which carried American munitions, despite the reports that the ship had carried bacon and 90 tons of unrefrigerated butter and cheese. On an additional note, it was said that the butter and cheese were refrigerated for a 7-day voyage, and that it was destined for a weapons establishment in Exeter. However, the bacon, butter and cheese were believed to be a cover-up for the real cargo. The cover-up didn't fool them though, as 2 German spies snuck on board and hid in a pantry carrying photographic equipment. When they were caught, they were interrogated by Detective Inspector William Pierpoint, and Pierpoint had a translator with him named Adolf Peterson. In response, Staff Captain James Anderson gave the orders to confine them below decks. Both spies died in the disaster. And what about the second explosion that occurred within 15 to 30 seconds after the torpedo hit the ship? Although there have been countless theories about what they are, it is believed that the second explosion could have been caused by either the munitions, ammunition, boiler explosion, or a second or third torpedo from U-20. Whatever the case might be, we might never know what caused the second explosion. Following the sinking, the British government and the Admiralty had denied claims about the Lusitania carrying ammunition supplies during her last voyage, or the first 2 years of the First World War. But since the radio exchanges between the Admiralty and the Lusitania are classified, and until the telegrams become public, we won't know some parts of the events leading up to the sinking, including the captain's actions. Today, the wreck is still considered a legitimate target because of any remaining British supplies of ammunition that could explode at any time, according to the British Foreign Office. In government papers, people have feared that any salvage operation could endanger lives due to the high levels of danger. What happened in 1915 remains a mystery and continues to be debatable. Unless we know the truth of the disaster, it's hard to say if the inquiry was a false sham. It is possible, but where is the missing piece of evidence, and when would it be revealed to the public? That's the question that continues to be on people's minds.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.